All right, good evening. We have a lot of special guests in the audience. I'm so excited. I would like to welcome everyone today. My name is Irene Bustamante Adams. I have the privilege of serving the board as the vice president. So I'm going to call the regular board meeting on August 8th, 2024 to order. The time is 5:01. We acknowledge that the land on which we gather is the territorial homeland of the Niwu, the Moapa Band of Paiutes and the Las Vegas Band of Paiutes. So some general housekeeping items. What we're going to do is remind everyone to silence your electronic devices. If you want to provide a public comment, please complete one of these public comment cards. We do have an oath of office today, so we're going to do the Pledge of Allegiance, the adoption of the agenda, and then go into the oath of office. In the oath of office for today, we are going to do the ceremony, sign the paperwork. We have a small reception off to the side here where we'll actually take some pictures, and then we will welcome the new appointed trustee to the dais to continue with the meeting. So we will take a recess, and then I'll also give a time of when we will return. Okay, so I'm going to ask Trustee Guzman to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Now I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda. You have to turn me on. Okay.
Okay. Madam President, members of the board, I would like to make a motion to adopt the agenda with the following change. Revised reference material for item 4.01, Notice of Intent, Clark County School District Regulation 2130.
Thank you. Is there a second? So I just want to let you know that this little small device here is like navigating an airplane. So I am going to ask my colleagues on the dais for grace. If I accidentally turn you off, please forgive me. But somebody is on. Is somebody's mic on? Let's see. Thank you, Trustee Williams. I have a first from Trustee Guzman, a second from Trustee Williams. Please cast your vote. Trustee Garcia Morales?
Aye.
Okay, that motion passes 7-0. Now we're going to go into our special ceremony. I would like to just give some general instructions and just express our gratitude to North Las Vegas and for their appointment, but also take the personal privilege to thank our former colleague. And so he is not here today. I don't see him in the audience, but thank Trustee Watson for his service and his leadership. It was 6 months of a pleasure to be able to have him with his wisdom, his experience, and help us to navigate the first half of the year of having appointed trustees to the board. So I'd like to thank him for his service. But now we are here for our special moment, and I'd like to ask the Honorable Judge Hu from the North Las Vegas Justice Court, Department 1, to come on up and administer the oath of office. Judge, can you hold on for a second? Mr. Caruso, can you turn on the mic so that the public could hear? Thank you so much.
All right, if you could raise your right hand, please repeat after me. I state your name.
I, Isaac Barone,
Do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support, protect, and defend
that I will support, protect, and defend
the Constitution and government
the Constitution and government
of the United States,
of the United States
the Constitution and government
and the Constitution and government
of the State of Nevada,
of the State of Nevada
against all enemies,
against all enemies,
whether domestic or foreign,
whether domestic or foreign,
that I will bear true faith,
and I will bear true faith,
allegiance, and loyalty
allegiance, and loyalty
to the same,
to the same.
the ordinance, resolution, or law
Any ordinance, resolution, or law
of any state notwithstanding,
of any state notwithstanding,
that I will well and faithfully perform
that I will well and faithfully perform
all the duties of the office
all the duties of the office
of state,
of trustee, Park County School District, appointed by the city of North Las Vegas,
of which I'm about to enter.
of which I'm about to enter.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Congratulations.
Madam President, if you allow me, I want to thank very much my good friend, Judge Kalani, who's done some fantastic things there in the Justice Court, getting people back on a rehabilitative path to becoming full citizens and productive in our community. And of course, I want to thank the mayor and the city council, my friends and colleagues on the city of North Vegas, of course, my staff who's here. I have my education czar and her team, and I'm very happy that I have, of course, my former colleague, former student of mine, Rancho High School educator and state legislator, Mr. Ruben De Silva, here in the audience. And in the back, if we would be so kind to recognize your former trustee and a giant upon which we all stand, the first Latino elected to this honorable board, Mr. Larry Masson. And when I mean giant, he's 6'7".
Thank you so much. We are honored to have you here in our house with us. We're going to take a recess. It is now 5:08. We will come back at 5:25. It'll allow us to be able to take pictures, and we have light refreshments in the next room. So please, we will exit and enjoy you having joined the board. So thank you. Our consent agenda. I just want to remind the audience, if you have not filled out a public comment card, please do so. It's yellow, if you could hold it up, and give it to our staff here to my right. We're going to have our public comment first before we go to the consent agenda. So I'd like to invite Ms. Carrie Lardner to the dais up here, and then after her, Sandra Tamboro, and then Vicky, you will be third. And we'll start our timer.
All right, good evening. My name is Carrie Larnard. I'm here as a matter of general public interest, and I want to address the critical labor shortage and a non-board approved MOA between CCSD and CCEA. January 5th, I retired, and within weeks, made the decision to return and fill a critical labor shortage position. In February, I was hired at a Title I Tier 1 high school where I stepped into 6 sections of English 12 co-teach, where there was no licensed teacher all year, and where 76 students were failing. By the end of the year, only 4 failed the class. I'm pretty proud of the work I did at Del Sol Academy. I signed a contract in February 2024 and signed my contract for the 24-25 school year, only to be called at the end of May and told my contract was changing. In fact, I would be taking a $31,000 pay cut and now make the same as a first-year teacher. In February, quite curious timing since that's when I started teaching, conversations about this new MOA started. I was told that CCEA and CCSD decided the intent of the new contract was not for retired CCSD administrators. What? It's all still good for any other administrator in the state or country, but if you serve the students and community of CCSD, your experience, expertise, training, and heart no longer matter and won't be honored. The legislators I have spoken to are angry that CCSD leadership once again misuses the intent of their historic funding increase, purposely designed to provide the best education possible for students in Nevada. Oh, and this intent is retroactive to December 2023, affecting only 3 current teachers who made the choice I did, but it will affect every retired administrator hereafter. And yet it was signed in May and still has not come before you, the board, who I know does care that every child has a licensed teacher. Why the secrecy from the board, and why hide this from the public? When asked why, no answer. Dr. Larson Mitchell and Mrs. Triana have not responded to my email, and quite frankly, all admin and teachers I talked to were appalled and told me to quit. Plenty of private and charter schools would pay me what I'm valued, but here's the thing. I made a commitment to the students and staff at Del Sol for this year, but don't know if I will stay next year unless this is rectified. I gave my career to this district, and I'm coming back to serve our students and my community again, and this is how I'm treated. Gratitude is the word that administrators say was a major takeaway this year from district leadership. I guess you're only grateful if you weren't a CCSD administrator. No less than 15 admin have contacted me, and most have chosen to go elsewhere or will go elsewhere after they retire, now leaving kids without a highly qualified teacher and leader. 15 secondary administrators equals 3,000 students in the future without a licensed teacher when they choose to go somewhere else. No other district in Nevada is treating retired administrators this way. Why would Dr. Larson Mitchell sign this? Why does she think so little of CCSD administrators when she told them how grateful she is for them? I ask that this board demand this MOA be brought before them, and I ask that you question and ultimately, because you do put kids and teachers first, that you reject this MOA so you can attract and retain highly trained and qualified instructional leaders back into our classrooms where we are desperately needed and can stand next to these incredible teachers we now call colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Next, if we could have Sandra.
Thank you. As a matter of general public interest, I want to address the critical labor shortage and the non-board approved MOA going into effect this month. This is a concern that has negatively impacted me personally. Please allow me a moment to share. In 1992, I moved here from New Jersey to teach for CCSD during a teacher shortage. 23 years later, in 2015, I was appointed AP of Schirkenbach Elementary School. In October the following year, my principal resigned to run a charter. I was asked to join her, but opted to remain loyal to CCSD and not transfer. I ran Schirkenbach from October until August with the support of an occasional substitute administrator for short stints, whose sole purpose was to act as a figurehead. The subs did not take on any responsibility. I did the job of 2 administrators for 10 months at the salary of 1 assistant principal. The district eventually filled the vacancy with an admin from Kansas who had zero knowledge of CCSD policies and procedures. I ended up mentoring and training this new hire because the district doesn't have anything in place for out-of-state administrative transfers, much like I am mentoring staff who are making more than me now at this point. As a result, he lasted only 1 year with CCSD. I dedicated my life to CCSD. I lost valuable time that I could have spent with my family, and my health was affected as well. In 2020, during COVID, I was still at Schirkenbach and served as the only administrator on campus because the then appointed principal had a child with diabetes and a mother with cancer, which put her presence on campus at high risk during such a dangerous time. Once again, I was present on the front lines to serve the only district that I had ever worked for. After 30 years with CCSD, I retired. I then went to work for a charter in the winter of 2024. A friend reached out to me and asked if I would consider coming back to CCSD to fill a critical needs position at her school. I inquired with HR and submitted my application, and an offer was made, which was more than my current salary at the charter. So I signed on in March with CCSD, and I notified the charter that I would not return in the fall. On Tuesday, May 21st, my charter confirmed that I definitely had my mind set on leaving before they filled the vacancy because they hoped to convince me to stay. On Friday, just 3 days later, Roanne Triana called me at 3:50 p.m. to let me know about this newly signed MOA. She couldn't provide me with any specifics until after Memorial Day. She assured me that she was going to personally call me back on that Tuesday with the details, but she did not. She had someone else call me and let me know that my offer was $35,000 less than the first offer. I attempted to contact Ms. Triana twice, and my calls were never returned. Had I known just 3 days earlier about this MOA, I would have rescinded my resignation to the charter. You're probably wondering why I'm still here. I am here because I am loyal to a fault. I am committed to a friend and a colleague, as well as the students and staff of the school that I'm at. I promise to serve the community and offer optimal educational experience that they deserve, and above all, I am helping to lessen the critical labor shortage. CCSD, you not only let me down, a loyal and a dedicated employee for over.
Thank you, Ms. Tamboro. Vicki?
Good evening, Interim Superintendent and Trustees. My name is Vicki Cridell. I'm President of NEA of Southern Nevada, and I'm a teacher in Clark County School District. This is regarding consent agenda item 2.29. While I was preparing to speak tonight, I went through and looked through the entire presentation. I had to read it through multiple times. Why? Because I just couldn't believe that an entire presentation was created about teacher morale and retention without actually speaking to your educators. And after asking a few people to look at the presentation, I can definitively state that lack of recognition is absolutely not the reason that licensed staff are leaving CCSD. I understand that educator retention is a complex issue with no easy solutions. That being said, a great start would be to talk to your educators. I can give you a few suggestions of things that could have been included in this presentation, things I've mentioned before. Number one, stop the practice of blacklisting educators. If we weren't disciplined, or we had a series of bad evaluations, there should be nothing in our file, period. Number two, give staff members a way to report unacceptable situations at our schools anonymously. We shouldn't have to worry about retaliation if we're just informing the district about situations that are making people leave a school or unsafe or unhealthy situations at a site. Number three, if a school is reported to be hostile or unsafe, then the district should be visiting that school to figure out what is going on. Talk to the staff there. Take action. Number four, reach out into the community to create partnerships with companies who can provide meaningful year-round discounts for CCSD staff members. When I first moved here, the apartments that I moved into offered a CCSD discount. Why not expand that? I'm sure there are companies willing to do this for us. Number five, expand the mental health services for staff so that we don't get just a few visits for free. It takes time to find a therapist that works for us, so getting a few visits really doesn't help. And the last thing is, please make fixing the salary scale a priority. Every single day that the veteran teachers have to look at the new salary scale and recognize how far away we are from where we should be on the salary scale puts us one day closer to leaving CCSD. And what was just spoken of about the administrators, who they changed the salary scale on them to, that is, I did not know about that, and that's appalling. We need these people to come back into the district and work to help our students so that we can have quality licensed educators doing instruction in our classrooms. So that's another issue that needs to be taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't see anybody else, right?
Right.
Okay. Therefore, since we don't have any other, yes, Ms. Adams, I do have you on the list, but it's for 5.01, which is an item that's not listed on the agenda. Is that an error? Which item would you like to speak on? Okay, please come forward, Ms. Adams. And please, can you, and then for the record, if you could state the agenda item you said, I didn't hear you way back there, but it would be over here too. Yes.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jen D'Antuono Adams. I apologize. I just came from the classroom. Otherwise, I would be wearing a suit. I'm going to be talking about our focus, which is 2.29, employee morale, engagement, and retention. As a general public interest, I'm going to address critical labor shortage as well, and an MOA for 2621. A little bit about myself. I started teaching in the Clark County School District. I moved here from New York in 1994. I taught kindergarten through 6th grade. 2019, I was awarded the Heart of Education Award for teaching, which was a big accomplishment for me. At that same year, I also became a school administrator. I administrated at Twitchell Elementary School during COVID without a principal, since my principal was promoted to open a new school. So I did that on my own for 6 months, welcoming children back to the classroom. I since then went up to teach was administrator for middle school, and I retired in December. I returned back to the classroom for critical labor shortage, and I was excited to enter a classroom. I was the third teacher that was assigned to those little babies this year when I took over in February. I heard in May that CCSD and CCA had some confusion on the salary that they had offered me, and that they were going to not consider me in a teacher salary. They were using an outdated salary from 2015. And I was going to take a $40,000 pay cut. And my son, who just left the PPP program and started, he's a first-year SPED teacher with autism, and he's going to be making slightly less than what I'm going to be making with 2 master's degree and 30 years of experience. I'm just asking of the school board, could you please just look at this MOU? It's disheartening that I won't be paid as a teacher in a teacher's position with a teacher's heart. I think every good administrator is a teacher at heart, and that's why we wanted to go back into the classroom. This is clearly discouraging us. So please just consider this when you're reviewing the MOU. Every child deserves to have a licensed teacher in front of them. And I would not want to win the lottery of having a student, my child, be in a classroom without a licensed teacher. And my children don't deserve that, and neither do any of the children in the Clark County School District. So consider that MOU again, please. Thank you so much for your time, and congratulations.
Thank you, Ms. Adams. Okay, seeing no other public comment cards for the consent agenda, I will now entertain a motion to adopt the consent agenda.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I'd like to make a motion to adopt the consent agenda as presented.
Thank you. I have a first and
A second.
Thank you. I have a first from trustee Williams, and I have a second from trustee Brooks. Please cast your votes. President Garcia Morales.
Aye.
Okay, I see that motion passes 6-0. 6-1. Thank you. All right. With that, then, I'm going to ask trustee Guzman to go ahead and read into the record the warrants.
Thank you, Vice President Bustamante Adams. The ratified warrants is listed in the bills payable, transmittal, and board memorandum number 2-24-25 in the total amount of $182,177,263.18.
Thank you. With that, we're going to move on to agenda item 3.01. This is a board report on student discipline and chronic absenteeism. I'm going to go ahead and invite the staff to come up. We will first hear the presentation, then we will have public comment. If there's any public comment, fill out the yellow card, and then we will have board discussion. And so, Mr. McFarland, I don't know who would like to start. Are you on? Nope. There you are.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board. For the record, Brenda Larson Mitchell. Tonight, the team will be presenting a combined presentation focusing on student discipline and chronic absenteeism in an effort to finalize these results for the 2023-2024 school year. And at this time, with your permission, Madam Vice President, I'll turn it over to Mr. McPartland.
Okay. Thank you. Madam Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, I am Kevin McPartland, Associate Superintendent of the Education Services Division, for the record. This is a combined Focus 2024 strategic plan and will cover our efforts and outcomes related to student discipline during the second semester of the 23-24 school year, as well as our end-of-the-year reporting on chronic absenteeism. Joining me tonight is Ms. Danielle Jones, Director over Chronic Absenteeism and Shared Housing, and Dr. Sam Scavella, the Assistant Superintendent of the Equity and Diversity Education Division. As a reminder, our student discipline and chronic absenteeism presentations contribute to the vision of the Board of Trustees under the student success priority and within the area of safety and engagement. We will start our presentation tonight with student discipline. As part of the Focus 2024 strategic plan, we have presented the student discipline updates multiple times, starting in 2019 with the last presentation on March 28, 2024. Our theory of action is that if we effectively implement MTSS to promote academic achievement, social emotional growth, and behavioral development, and we couple this with effective monitoring tools, then student discipline will decrease. Our strategies to address student discipline are aligned to our theory of action and include our comprehensive data dashboard, increased partnerships to support our students and families, and the expansion of the use of restorative practices to hold students accountable and ensure they remain connected to the school community. We also acknowledge that students that commit violent offenses must be addressed differently than less severe offenses. This slide is a visual representation of total suspensions for each year going back to the 18-19 school year. After 3 semesters of declining suspensions, we do show that by the end of last year, there were 535 more suspensions in 23-24 than the previous year, representing a 1.8% increase. We wanted to dive deeper into our suspension data to show you the data through the third quarter of last year and compare that to the third quarters of the previous post-COVID years. We see that we had nearly 800 fewer suspensions through 3 quarters in 2023-24 than the previous year, representing a 3.5% decrease. This means that we went from 800 fewer suspensions to 535 more suspensions in just the fourth quarter. This is a data point that we are already working with school supervisors on to investigate the school-based procedures that led to this fourth quarter uptick in suspensions last year. On slide 8, we are comparing the number of suspensions by level at the end of the third quarter and at the end of the school year. We left the Focus 2024 targets here, even though they've expired. They are just for your information. We don't do the shading based on them. If I could refer you to column that represents the quarter 3 data, I first want to share that the high school suspension there, 7,202, is actually 2,300 suspensions less than the previous year, which is a 25% decrease through 3 quarters at the high school level. For middle schools, that number, the 12,276, is actually a 12% increase from the previous year. As we move across the totals to the end of the year, high schools continue to demonstrate positive discipline trends and decrease overall suspensions by 18% compared to the previous year. Elementary schools had approximately 1,000 suspensions during the fourth quarter. This kept them at about the same comparative level they were during the third quarter, with an overall increase of about 10%. For middle schools, we see that they had 5,000 more suspensions during the fourth quarter, and their total of 17,000 is a 16% increase from the previous year. Based on the fourth quarter and overall data, it is clear that we need to focus our efforts on the middle school level. I will share our plans for this during the next step slide so we can show how we will examine the processes that we implemented so successfully at our high schools and determine which can be transitioned down to the middle school level. This slide shows the suspensions by student group and at the end of the third quarter and at the end of the year. As a reminder, the metric on these slides are the total suspensions within a student group per 1,000 students. Again, through the third quarter, the suspension rate was nearly the same or decreased for all student groups, including a 9-point decrease for the Black African American student group. As we move to the end of the year data, the increase in overall suspensions during the fourth quarter is also reflected in this data. Using our metric for student groups, the suspension rates increased across the board for all student groups. Slide 10 addresses discretionary expulsions for the entire year last year. As a reminder, per state guidelines, it is mandatory for schools to recommend an expulsion for offenses related to weapons. Any expulsion recommendation for any other offense is considered discretionary. As you can see here, we had approximately 120 fewer discretionary expulsions than in 2022-23, which is an 8% decrease. Again, just digging into the data a little further through the third quarters and comparing, we had 130 fewer discretionary expulsions during the first 3 quarters last year than we did in 22-23, representing a 12% decrease. So while we saw an uptick in suspensions during the fourth quarter, we did not see a similar increase in discretionary expulsions. So our schools are definitely keeping students within their school community more than they were in the past. Slide 12 displays discretionary expulsions by level through the third quarter and through the end of the school year. We are happy to show that discretionary expulsions decreased through the third quarter and through the end of the year for both middle schools and high schools. By the end of the year, middle schools had reduced discretionary expulsions by 5% and high schools by 11%. Again, not approaching the targets that we set prior to COVID, but moving in the right direction with discretionary expulsions. Slide 13 shows, again, discretionary expulsions by student group. Again, it's discretionary expulsions within the student group per 1,000 students. Using this metric, the rate decreased for every student group in quarter 3. As we move to the end of the year data, we did see an increase in several student groups that rose to the similar levels of the previous year. However, there were some positive trends within this, including a 12% decrease in discretionary expulsion rate for African American student group and a 6% for the Hispanic student group. Again, so we still have work to do, but moving in the right direction with expulsions. Comparing our discipline data to other districts has always been difficult for us in these presentations due to the variety of ways that districts can code their disciplinary actions. So we look forward to adjusting this presentation template for you moving forward in the future. Looking at challenges just briefly, again, one of our challenges is it's difficult to provide large-scale, level-wide professional development in the middle of the school year, but we have taken advantage of the summer break to provide professional learning at the region as well as at the district-wide level to improve our practices at schools. And we are consistently working with our partners to expand communication and data sharing practices. This is especially true for our partners in the Department of Juvenile Justice and the Harbor. Successes. We are proud that we have a revised and recently approved Student Code of Conduct. This document was created with great input from multiple departments within the district and in the community. It prioritizes restorative practices and working with families as partners to address student behaviors. We're also proud to share that short-term suspensions, 1 and 2 days, for minor infractions decreased by 12% last year. This coincided with a 217% increase in the use of restorative practices in our schools. Again, a highlight of why the partnership between education services and equity and diversity is so important. Lessons learned. We needed to clean up our communication with our parents and families when dealing with student discipline. These improved communication systems are addressed within the new Code of Conduct through our ESD processes and were included and have been included in our professional learning sessions with our administrators. Also, in order to support schools with reducing exclusionary practices and expanding the use of restorative practices, we in central office must provide them with consistent data monitoring, personalized guidance, and ensure they have access to the necessary resources to be successful. And finally, for our next steps, all related to the Code of Conduct and the implementation of the new Code of Conduct, we're continuing to offer full-scale trainings for our administrators on the new Code of Conduct, re-entry plans for students, and communications with families. We have implemented the mandatory student ID badges and non-locking signal blocking pouches at our secondary schools. This is designed to enhance school safety and increase student engagement and the focus on learning. As previously mentioned, we will be focusing on supporting our middle schools this fall. We have pulled 6 years' worth of data for all middle schools, and we are supporting school supervisors and their investigative work into the policies and procedures at the school sites when they are addressing student behavior. We will also break middle schools into tiers to differentiate support in order to be as efficient and effective as possible in focusing on their practices to correct the behavior we saw during the fourth quarter, the behavior referrals. We will also continue with the student town halls, again, focusing at the middle school level. We will now transition to our chronic absenteeism, which will cover our outcomes for the entire 2022-23-24 school year. Before we continue with the presentation, I'd like to start by reminding you of the definition of chronic absenteeism. It came up through our briefings. Chronic absenteeism is the total percentage of students who are absent for 10% or more of their enrolled school days. As part of the Focus 2024 strategic plan, we have presented chronic absenteeism multiple times, the last being May 9th, 2024, which you may remember we had the panel of principals up here for you. For chronic absenteeism, we are maintaining the expanded theory of action that based on the positive results we are seeing. If we work with multiple agencies and district departments, and if we provide quality Tier 1, 2, and 3 instruction with effective monitoring tools, and support schools to be more consistent in their implementation of attendance-focused regulations, then chronic absenteeism will decrease. Our strategies are aligned with that theory and include our comprehensive data dashboard, continuing our increase with partnerships, which we've had great success with partnerships related to chronic absenteeism to support our students and families. Madam Vice President, with your permission, I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Jones to review the data points with you.
Thank you. Madam Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Danielle Jones for the record. First, I'd like to share the visualization of the final chronic absenteeism rate by student group for the last school year. The light blue column on the right side of each grouping demonstrates a substantial reduction in chronic absenteeism so far this year, from 36% last year to 30.9% this year. We have also been in communication with the Nevada Department of Education, who has adjusted the business rules for calculating student counts for chronic absenteeism. We now know that our actual final chronic absenteeism rate for the 2023-2024 school year is 29.8%. Additionally, the chronic absenteeism rate has decreased for every student group compared to this year. This slide has traditionally been used to demonstrate chronic absenteeism rates compared to targets that were set prior to COVID. Although the Focus 2024 targets have expired, we still want to report this data in order to showcase that chronic absenteeism has decreased for all student groups so far this year. So comparing these rates to the same time last year, we saw a decrease of 7.8% for American Indian, Alaska Native student groups, a decrease of 6.1% for Hispanic student groups, and 5.7% reduction for African American, English language learner, and students eligible for special education student groups. This slide demonstrates the gap between the highest and lowest student groups for chronic absenteeism. And again, while targets have concluded with the ending of Focus 2024 strategic plan, we wanted to showcase that this gap has decreased this year. Last year, the final end gap was 28.8%. So while we have reduced the gap by 3.2%, we still have a lot of work to do, but it is noted we're moving in the right direction. This slide is where we showcase our data compared to similar districts. Unfortunately, when this presentation was being finalized, the other districts had not updated their data dashboards yet. We will continue to monitor what websites and be able to report this comparative data for you in the future. Next, I'd like to highlight some of the challenges, successes, and lessons learned since our last presentation on this topic. Starting with the challenges. One of the challenges is that we've had a wide variety of diverse circumstances that require multiple targeted strategies to assist our students and families, including feelings of belongingness at school, basic needs being met, and mental health concerns, to name a few. As we analyze and identify some trends in the root causes of chronic absenteeism, the Education Services Division is excited to partner with the district's multi-tiered Systems of Support, or MTSS, department to provide summer professional training sessions to support our school administrators and the efforts to focus on Tier 1 instruction. We know that having quality instruction plays a major role in student engagement and attendance. With professional learning, we are focused to ensuring students are receiving the appropriate level of support to improve their attendance. The successes for us is in the heart of our work of ESD is to make connections with families. As you can see with the report being pulled for this presentation, our attendance officers completed over 38,000 home visits for attendance checks for the 2023-24 school year. The visits focused on understanding the students' individual needs and communicating those needs back to the school, as well as connecting families to available resources to address the root causes of absenteeism. Since that data has been pulled, we've increased our efforts during the summer, and our dedicated district attendance enforcement officers have completed 6,000 more home visits, including visits to offer support to families, to get students enrolled who have withdrawn due to attendance, and to continue to identify barriers for students who were chronically absent last year. Beginning in July, we had school staff members join our officers to complete home visits. We provided school supplies and provided by the engagement unit to students to help them get geared up and excited for the new school year. Another success we'd like to note is that over 12,000 of our students were recognized for having perfect attendance last year. Some lessons learned. Through our efforts this year in working with families, we have been able to identify 5 root causes for schools that have the greatest impact in supporting chronically absent students. The successes we've had in identifying root causes and improving chronic absenteeism rates are directly due to the collaboration with multiple district departments and offices, the tireless work of our school administrators, and our incredible community partners. To conclude with our next steps, we are currently in the process of offering professional learning for all of our administrators. We just finished that up today, involved with student discipline and attendance to ensure they understand the new code of conduct and are able to implement those strategies outlined within it with fidelity. We are partnering with Clark County to support them in their efforts to refine the Truancy Prevention Outreach Program, or TPOP. We are developing a standard targeted list of supports needed from our municipality partners who are joining us to combat chronic absenteeism. This list will be developed from trend data uncovered from our home visits. A few examples include affordable child care options, police or security in neighborhoods that families are hesitant to let their children walk through to get to school. We will continue to provide additional targeted support for schools to ensure they have the tools in place to address chronic absenteeism early in the school year with early and frequent communication with families regarding attendance. Student town halls will also continue, so we're aware of the needs of our student population. With that information, we'll be able to address those needs with necessary resources. That concludes our presentation. We're happy to clarify any data points, answer questions.
Thank you. So trustees, please put yourself in the queue. We're going to Is there any public comment? Because this is an action item. Okay. Seeing no public comment, then we will start. Trustee Zamora. And you know what? We're going to stick with student discipline first. So we've got 2 reports. So student discipline first, and then we'll switch to chronic absenteeism. So do you have a question on student discipline? Yes. Okay. I got to turn you on.
Thank you, Vice President Bustamante Adams. Yes, I said that right? Yes. It was interesting, Mr. McPartland, because when you said, I think, a change about the format of these presentations, I was literally writing that down, right? Because I think these are 2 different topics that need to be separated, so we're able to really get down in the nitty-gritty of the data for both. Because, like Trustee Baron just flagged to me, right, the breakdown, even the grade levels, like there's no breakdown for the second part. But my first question for the discipline, this one's really interesting to me, and I want to just clarify, make sure that with the new policies of the cell phones being in pouches and all that, that the next update will be including that. Especially with the middle school, I feel like the kids are getting younger and they're getting cell phones now, and it's going to be really interesting because I did have conversations with some principals in middle school specifically, and one of the hot topics was that's how fights are starting, right? And we're having a lot of discipline issues with that. So making sure that's included in the next report that we have. And I know that's going to possibly be a fast turnaround, but if there's something, some raw data we can have just to be able to really talk about that and have it publicly, you know, because there's just so much 50-50, and it's a controversial topic, but I'm really interested to see how it will help with our discipline issues.
Thank you. Was there a question in there?
No, it was a comment.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I thought I had
All
a
right.
question.
All right. No, that's okay. So Trustee Baron, your question, and I think that I want to say, Trustee Zamora, you framed it well, is that this report, from what I take away, the structure of how it's reported, that was done before we got here. And so that's the format now, and we look forward to ways to improve on how we're getting the data. So we're sticking with the framework that we have now. But Trustee Baron, hold on.
Madam Chair. I do appreciate that. So I'm going back, I scroll back here to student inspections, progress and results, right? Can you please clarify for the record here, what are the different suspension groups? Of course, you have suspension groups for violent attacks of students on each other, maybe students on school personnel. There are other reasons why why students would get suspended, correct?
Madam Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Trustee Barone, thank you very much for the question. There are, so the Code of Conduct has, it's a 130-page document that includes all the different infractions, which also designates for the administrators which ones are minor, that you cannot do discipline or suspensions, and which ones you can do suspensions. So it delineates all the details based on the infraction. So you are correct, it's more than just that. Progressive discipline plays in place as well, but that's all in that Code of Conduct to guide our schools.
Fantastic. Well, you know, of course, I just barely got sworn in today, and I wasn't privy to any staff meetings, any updates, right? But as a person in the public, right, where can members of the public see where the breakdowns are? Of course, it'd be public information, of course, leaving out, you know, pertinent information like the student names, right? But there's got to be somewhere where the public can actually see what the breakdown is, right? Well, I would expect, with all respect, because I would actually expect to be able to see this, and that the public would be able to see it as well.
Question, I have to be faster on this trigger. I do not see your name. There it is, all the way down in the bottom. Okay.
Madam President, members of the board, for the record, Brenda Larson Mitchell. Yes, that data is available on ccsd.net on our data spreadsheets. It's available by district, it's available by school, so that data is available.
Okay, well, with respect, in the future, I would really appreciate there being a link here to where I could see it. Of course, I'm sure in a briefing, I will be asking for it. But again, anything that I should see here as a trustee should be available to anybody on the audience. You would agree, right?
Yes, and it is, but I do understand that getting a link so that you could see it, I would we would entertain that, so
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you very much. And got a couple more questions here. I remember years ago, I'm really happy that the district has, with time, has evolved. One fantastic thing that the district did was shut down the two original so-called opportunity schools. They were both, of course, located in downtown North Vegas, right? And it's kind of funny, they were named Washington and Jefferson Opportunity Schools. A wonderful thing happened in which the district made a major shift in closing down most of the opportunity schools, because if you looked at the opportunity schools, you'd swear this was a black and brown straight-up district, because, you know, I think there were some issues with that. That being said, I would like in the future also there be some sort of a sub-report for me to know how the district is encouraging there to be a more uniform report, a more uniform standard throughout the school district, high school, middle school, and of course elementary, on how of course the discipline program is being implemented. Again, only because like in the past, you know, we did have of course standards, but it seemed like every school, every zone had their own way of doing this. You know, they had their own way of measuring this. And it seemed like some schools, after the students had been re-entered from disciplinary expulsions, man, it seemed like there were kids from certain schools that were flooding all the rest of the schools. So in the future, I would also really like to see, and I would expect to see a report on how that there's going to be a uniform measuring. And of course, if there's a uniform measuring, there's going to be an accountability, of course, on how the building principals will be required to submit the information. And which gets me to my last question on this topic: who actually compiles these? Who is it? The building principals that actually submit these statistics? Is it CCSD police? Is there like or is there a blend? I would be really interested in knowing.
So thank you. On that first one, on the report, we're going to do that as a team. We will identify what we want to see in these reports. And so since this school year is ending, that's an exercise we're going to go through. And so we will get a chance to have input on what we want to see and what we want to measure. Right?
That's fantastic. And I would like to make sure that detail, not because we want to get into the weeds, but because we definitely want to see where we need to place most of our resources.
But to answer the question, Mr. McPartlin, on how the information is compiled and who submits the data.
Madam Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Trustee Barone. So absolutely, it is pulled from Infinite Campus as a part of reports of everything that goes into Infinite Campus, from schools, suspensions. Some police data is included in there when it involves a school, but it is not schools giving us the data. We actually run the reports system-wide from what we have in our program. So it's not provided by schools. We pull it from the data.
Thank you so much.
In that case, then, it's also still dependent upon what gets uploaded to Infinite Campus.
That would be true, so we would have a date of when it was pulled. So, I mean, if you're asking for that, then we could put when the data was pulled, so when we're reporting. So, is that what you're asking?
Well, as a teacher, believe me, if I have someone who showed up to my class, and of course, this was not that long ago, if I have someone who shows up to my class 3 times, in a row, you can bet your boots I was making phone calls home and putting that up on Infinite Campus. But I know it's the same student because I look. I know they're showing up late to other people's classes, but not everyone reports the same. And if I'm not seeing it in one school, not everything's been reported the same, I think there might be like a disconnect on how information is being uploaded. And so again, to make sure that we have equity, we have to do things to make sure that there is uniformity in how information is being reported.
Thank you for that comment. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next person. So the next trustee, Trustee Guzman.
Thank you, Vice President Bustamante Adams. I appreciate it. I appreciate this presentation. And I hope you don't mind. I want to talk about restorative practices. You knew I was coming to you, didn't you? Because we spent so much money on it, and I'm wondering if in this report we can show the schools that are implementing it versus the schools that aren't, because they're all supposed to be implementing it according to the law, but there are some schools that don't have a fully trained staff. Am I correct on that?
Madam President, Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell. Trustee Guzman, every school in our district has a restorative leadership team at this point who has been trained. They've gone through the 13-hour, 2-day training to get the foundational theory and processes, and then they have time to actually practice those processes on the continuum. And then one person from each school is actually a restorative practices trainer, because they've gone back and got an additional 20 hours of training from the International Institute for Restorative Practices. There have been some movement, so we're in the process of surveying our schools now to find out if there's any teams that need to increase the membership of their restorative leadership teams, or have one of those restorative leadership team members become what we coin as a culturally inclusive champion, who is also a restorative practices trainer. So remember, the actual district implementation model is a trainer-trainer model. Right. So they are charged now to train their educators and staff on each individual school site. So we're in the process of also scheduling some quarterly meetings with our trainers, which we coin as our CICs, our culturally inclusive champions, and also to actually monitor what schools are meeting or mastering restorative focus and what schools are approaching. At the end of this last year, we had no schools that did not meet restorative focus because they all had restorative leadership teams, which can consist of up to 5 members on each individual staff.
Right, but and I love that they have teams. My question is about ensuring the educators are also trained so that it goes down, so that it's affecting the students. And so looking at it through that lens and ensuring that, yes, we have those teams, but do we have the educators implementing those restorative practices so that the discipline, because that's the theory of action, right, in the restorative practices. If they do what we've trained them to do in restorative practices, then we would have less disciplinary issues. Is that correct?
Madam Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Trustee Guzman, that's exactly correct. So the members of the restorative leadership team are educators.
Right.
They are educators. It could be anybody that's on the staff, to be honest with you, can serve on the restorative leadership team. And also, we're expanding that to include parents, to include students on the restorative leadership teams, once we get to the point where schools are mastering restorative focus. So that's our ultimate goal.
Okay.
Here's where the work is to actually train the staff at each individual school. Since it is a trainer-trainer model, and the culturally inclusive champions, who are the restorative practices trainers, will be training the staff. They have all of the curriculum from the International Institute for Restorative Practices, and they have the training and skill set to do the training for the staff. So that's where the work is, to make sure that each staff is being trained, for schools to find time to do the training during collaborative times, in which those are the non-teaching times that we can actually do the training. And the training is broken into like 30-minute increments at times, and depending on which area of focus they're going to be training on in regards to restorative practices. So the monitoring is where, since we've been doing this work for 3 years, this is going into year 4, now is where we really uptick on the monitoring and to see exactly. We've had the school assess themselves, do self-assessment, and that's why we kind of knew where schools were in terms of whether or not they were not meeting restorative focus, whether or not they were approaching, whether or not they were meeting or mastering. And that's where we were able to tier schools and to identify 6 schools that will serve as our restorative practices model schools going into this year.
And we'll be monitoring that, and we can report on that for discipline, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Trustee Cavazos?
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Thank you, Mr. McPartland, Ms. Jones, Dr. Scavella, for this presentation and update. Appreciate it as always. Just a short question here on the disciplinary part. That is a large increase, of course, in the middle schools. So I heard you say that you were going to be zeroing in on what is working, of course, with the high schools and how we can kind of apply that to the middle schools. What was and this is a constituent question because I think you answered it for me already in briefing, what was the largest category, if you can elaborate a little bit or dig down a little bit deeper on the type of infractions that were in that large increase?
Madam Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Trustee Cavazos, thank you for the question. So as we discussed, we really dug into the data on all of our middle schools going back prior to COVID, who they are suspending, what they're suspending them for, what non-exclusionary practices they have in place, what opportunities they have. So one of the things that we found that, and Dr. Scavella and I were working on this quite a bit this year, is the largest infraction code that's used for suspensions, as well as where we have the most disproportionality at the secondary level, is an unacceptable school behavior. Problem with that one being is that it's a very vague infraction code that didn't give us a lot of opportunity to support schools, to develop restorative practices, to guide them. So in the new code of conduct, as you may have seen, we actually eliminated unacceptable school behavior as a code for secondary schools. Elementary schools still can use it because that is a very proactive code they use so that to gain parents as partners in working with students. But at the secondary level, we really want to cause them to really label exactly what is that behavior that you're disciplining the student for so we can provide support. So it was in that one, and we made that adjustment.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the clarification. Thank you for your work. That was all that I had, Madam Vice President.
Thank you. Trustee Satori?
Thank you very much for the presentation. I definitely see some high points and things that are working well, and then definitely our areas of focus. And Trustee Cavazos asked my first question. Thank you very much. I wanted to know more about the types of infractions. So my second question would piggyback on Trustee Barone's one of his questions regarding the reporting. Regarding Infinite Campus reporting, so I know kind of in the past, some of my experience was that there was some discrepancies in how administrators were coding things in Infinite Campus. One may see it as, just to give a random example of, a student, I had a student that their parent had packed a knife in their lunchbox to cut their fruit, and it gets seen, but it was coded as weapon. However, it wasn't wielded as a weapon. But definitely 2 different people might code that differently. Do you see that there are still some discrepancies there and kind of how we're seeing this data, or is it that the training and communication has gone out to where it's getting a little more clean in that area?
Yeah. Madam Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Trustee Satori, thank you for the question. So, and again, being that I've been in the district so long, again, I was high school principal for 17 years, there certainly was a time that our main focus was on that consistency and what is coded, in which manner. And so that was a huge focus even prior to me moving into this position. It's consistently what we do trainings on, how we talk about the procedures. But I also want to point out that every region has a region behavior director that, again, works for Education Services Division, and they are truly the experts on all things discipline. They are part of writing our district regulations, the implementation of it. And so all of these discipline for when a student is going to be expelled or sent to the academic centers, they review all of those and actually do kind of have a monitoring piece before any major discipline is done that way. So it's much improved, plus we have safeguards.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Trustee Esparza-Estraffigan?
Thank you for the presentation. It's been some time we've come to this point, and I want to say that I appreciate some of the listening that you've done from us to do things a little differently. I want to zone in on, if we could flip back to where lessons learned slide. There, yep, you just skipped it. Discipline, yeah, there it is. There it is. So I had an opportunity, was invited to visit some. It was not within my municipality of Henderson, but I was invited with another trustee to the west side. And a lot of the concerns that were expressed really hit some of the challenges and lessons learned with the discrepancy of how schools are inconsistently addressing students' behaviors, specifically students of culture. I don't call them color, students of culture. So I would say to you that we heard that loud and clear. So I want to go to lessons learned at the bottom where it says personalized administrative professional learning sessions, because it does go in very much in line with what is going to be the training and what is that specifically, how is it going to shift with the new code of conduct, and to support the fact that that is not in alignment with what we're seeing and we're hearing in the community, the concerns.
Madam Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Trustee Esparza-Estraffigan, thank you for the question. So with this, and you're 100% correct, is that we have to personalize, because the data, as we pulled from all like our targeted middle schools, it's different across the board, and the disproportionality which may exist in all of them, it's for different student groups. And so that's really, I think, the first thing that we do is, one, in focusing the code of conduct and making sure that we can really evaluate what are those behaviors they are seeing. But the huge piece of that has been the student town halls, that getting into the schools, really targeting the middle schools especially now, that we do with Dr. Scavella and Equity and Diversity, to really have, in a safe environment, to have students actually talk to their teachers and their administrators about how they feel on the campus, speaking to how they feel they are targeted in different ways with different behaviors, and it really has been fleshed out. And Dr. Scavella truly is an expert, and I will let you speak on it as well, but of really fleshing out where the teachers are leaving and the principals are leaving and hearing and coming back to us of, it's about relationships and we're failing in that and we need to do better. And that's really what comes out of that. But maybe if, Madam Vice President, with your permission, I'll refer to Dr. Scavella.
Madam Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Trustee Esparza-Estraffigan. I say that right? Okay, thank you. Yeah, so that's a great question, and I think what's important is to understand that we're in a relationship business with our students, and that's one thing that restorative practices affords us, is an opportunity to establish and build relationships, because sometimes things will break down, and when they do, what are we restoring if we haven't established and built those relationships? So that's one of the key pieces. As well as in our town halls, it's really important that we hear the student voices. We hear exactly what their concerns are, and the way we conduct it is so that they understand. And a lot of times the principal is there, and the administrators and the teachers and their trusted adults are there as well on the campus, so they really feel free to be able to express how they feel in regards to their sense of belonging in the school, or regarding different discipline issues. One thing that's critical in regards to how we're really looking at discipline and behavior is to ensure that when educators are interacting with different students from different cultures, that we are culturally competent, or are working towards being more culturally competent to understand the strengths and the challenges that each student brings into the learning environment, so that we can interact with them appropriately, build relationships with them, hold them to high standards and accountability. And at the same time, the restorative process helps us to resolve some conflicts prior to the referrals being submitted, which populates the data that leads to disproportionality.
Thank you. I think that there's a lot of key essential things that you just mentioned on relationships and really understanding students' identity and their sense of who they are. And so I appreciate the work that's been done. I want to share, because the public doesn't have the privy to when we have our briefings. So I want to kind of piggyback on Trustee Zamora's question about the cell phone policy. Like whenever there's change that's going to happen, we're going to see probably a tick up in some of those behaviors because, people are adapting and it takes time for change to happen. So my just kind of a wondering was to consider that we capture the data differently for those types of situations because we need to isolate that so that we can not have it look like it's an escalation of all behaviors that are occurring. And my wondering also would be because we might see a tick in the beginning of the school year, maybe a decrease near the end. So that I just want the public to be aware those are things that we have had discussions and briefings that they're not privy to. But thank you very much for considering and listening for our recommendations.
Thank you. Trustee Brooks?
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Thank you for the presentation and the information. I had a question about the generic discipline code that you were using. So when you're reporting at the high school level, is the suspension and expulsion inclusive of that, or is that generic code only being used at the middle school?
Madam Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Trustee Brooks, thank you for the question. So that code is across the board, is used K through 12. Again, the question about what was the one that was most used in the middle schools that we were targeting, it is used in the high schools, not in the same manner that we're seeing at the middle schools.
Okay. So when you are reporting this high school level data, is it more aligned to the uniform standards that are reported through the Nevada report card and through the Department of Education? Or is this data would not match that?
Madam Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Trustee Brooks. So it's multiple things. So it is included because suspension data, removal data is all reported to the state by student group, by infraction, by response. So it is all included within there in a different manner than we have here, but it is included.
Okay. And then I want to say I'm supportive of tracking information related to cell phones. I think it's also really important to differentiate between like negative behavior interactions between like a student and a teacher over a cell phone versus a cell phone situation between students. I suspect you might have a slight uptick at the beginning of the year, and it would be, pretty much that generic code is probably what they would have used. But you probably will see a decrease from student to student because I think lots of parents have confirmed that a lot of the issues that are in schools are related to these cell phones. So I look forward, I might not be here, but I'll tune in to the news. Thanks.
Thank you. Trustee Johnson?
All right, thank you. Just a couple questions. One of the things you mentioned earlier is that you combed through 6 years of middle school data to kind of glean some understanding. Could you share some of the key findings you had from that data and what it's helped you kind of realize about moving forward?
Madam Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Trustee Johnson. So it was really an interesting study to go in, and we went, just to give you an idea, again, not just student data as far as discipline, suspensions, in-house, all those things, but also looking at teacher vacancies, also looking at staff turnover, looking at administrative turnover. So really kind of trying to get into what are all the things that may have been affecting the school at that time. And so this is data that we sit down with the school supervisors to really comb through because they're the ones that also have a better understanding of the school and can address it moving forward. So as far as trends, again, the unacceptable school behavior was certainly a trend that we had been tracking through the year and had already planned on the change, but it was verified through that. There were some codes that we don't allow suspensions for anymore as we went back. Things like students prior to COVID could have been, were removed for truancy, let's say, or tardies, like that. We don't do that anymore. But I think the trend data, it captures what we were trying to do is really focus on behaviors that really, if they're minor, let's make sure we're going through all of our progression, all of our restorative actions before we move on. And so I think we're going to have a good chance to do that with these schools.
All right. You touched on one of the things I was going to ask about next, which I'm thankful you mentioned. You said in that data collection, you looked at teacher vacancy, turnover, et cetera. And then I know Dr. Scavelli mentioned how relationships are so critical, and that's one of the key bridges to ensuring that students feel safe and seen on their campuses. And one of the things I think we have control over are the structures that we put into place to ensure that we have classrooms that are full. I know we're working on that consistently. That's not your specific role. I guess the question I have is, what are the ways that you're working with other departments to support or advocate for changes in some of our HR practices? So, for example, like ensuring that we don't have mid-year turnover of leaders, which could lead to negative impacts on relationships that have already been built in the school and then could drive that uptick, especially at the end of the year, which we've seen over the last 3 years. It consistently goes up in Q4. I'm not saying that is the reason, but again, if there are things that we have that are within our locus of control, can we, how do you all work with other departments to share, like, this data is affecting these things are affecting other things? How are we sharing that information? I don't know who's answering it. So everybody's looking at everybody else.
Madam President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Melissa Gutierrez for the record. That is where our school supervisors come in, Trustee Johnson, because they're able to look at all of the data points, look at teacher vacancies, and see if they need to maybe take a moment to take a look at systems and structures, see what needs to be put in place so that we can be proactive, possibly reach out to our MTSS department, see what positive behavior supports need to be put into place. But they're in the best position to know all of the pieces of the puzzle that might be impacting student discipline.
Got it. So, I guess in short, there hasn't been like some steps just yet about, look, we're going to change these human capital structures because we recognize that they're going to have impacts on student outcomes just yet. We haven't done that just yet.
Madam President, members of the board, thank you for the question, Trustee Johnson. When we look at this data collectively, we look at it together in executive leadership teams, of which Chief Triana is there as well. And then also looking at vacancies. When we know we have approximately 1,000 vacancies, it does affect vacancies in student classrooms and engagement and so forth. So we do look at all this data together as an executive leadership team, and we are working on building systems and structures within HR, looking at our recruitment and retention plan and so forth, so that will be more robust in the future.
I appreciate it. And then the last thing that was that I heard you all say, which I appreciated you touching on, and there's a question with it, I promise. You talked about the engagement of families, and I recognize that at the middle and high school levels, family engagement is lower than at elementary school levels. Just as children get older, parents give their children more leeway, and so they don't engage as much from what I've seen. But the question is, how are we engaging families in the process? Because I could imagine that they have an outsized impact on how students are showing up every day, how they feel, et cetera. And so I imagine they'd have some good insight around how we best support students on campus.
Madam Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Trustee Johnson, that's a great question because that's a critical piece that we can extract from the success of our district and our students. Is how do we engage parents? There are many ways that we can engage parents. One is through structures like our SOT school organization team. We also have each different school has different parent structures, like the parent advisory committees and the PTOs and things of that nature. Also, with our restorative processes, when a school is mastering restorative focus, That means that they have also provided some training to parents and actually brought parents on to the restorative leadership teams as well. We're not there yet, but that's the direction that we're going, so that we can get parents to really have a strong commitment and to the processes that we're doing in the schools and to the success and the cultures and climates that we're creating on our campuses. So that's a critical aspect of the work that we're doing. Mr. McPartland, can I pass it off?
Madam Vice President, thank you. Trustee Johnson, so just to couple with that, is again, in the Code of Conduct, we have completely revised also how we communicate with parents and more as partners in this rather than just kind of communicating after the fact. So that is in the Code of Conduct. When students are suspended for multiple days, there's a different kind of contact. There's a reentry plan process that we're put in place. So bringing that parents in as a partner, not just someone we're telling you what we're doing to your kid, is a big change in philosophy that we have in the Code of Conduct, and it's in force as to guide schools.
I appreciate that last part. I imagine being a partner in the process will welcome more families in and make them. It would make me feel as a parent like I had a say in it and really want to work more with the district. So glad it's happening. I'm excited to see how we continue to move forward and then see improved results as a result.
Thank you. I want to be able to give our President Garcia Morales an opportunity to ask any questions.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. My comments are broad in general, appreciation of the work that's happened to date, and having monitored this data now for 3 years, I see, and before that, we were not monitoring it publicly on the school board. So this is pretty significant that we're year 3 in. We continue to learn things and make adjustments and changes. I want to say from a parent's perspective that I really appreciate the messaging that went out in preparation for the start of the school year on Monday to parents. I received text messages. I received an email. I received this great parents guide to help me with the start of my school year, and all of that included pieces around the Code of Conduct to ensure that I knew, and my family knew, and more importantly, my little big human knows what is expected of them in terms of behavior. So know that those changes are felt from the parents' perspective, and I'm really looking forward to some of the pieces that have been brought up around middle school, some reflections that have been uncovered from data reviews that we need to pay a little more attention to our students in middle school. So looking forward to the next presentation that will continue to have some of these insights and potential changes. So my one question for you is, what support can the Board of Trustees offer to continue this progress that's taking place?
Madam President, members of the board, and Madam Vice President, thank you for the question. The support from the Board of School Trustees is greatly appreciated, and the continued questions that come and the feedback that is provided helps us get better. So appreciate that. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's all I have for this.
Okay, so we had thank you so much. We had a second report on chronic absenteeism. If any members have questions, we'll start with Trustee Barron.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. And of course, I say that with respect that of course, the president is on the air. Second, yeah, it's basically kind of like a lead on to the first question. I just did have a question on the chronic absenteeism. At the high school level, of course, we have, and you have school between 6 and 8 periods. Is the absenteeism, is it defined whether a student misses, for instance, 1 period a day? Is 1 period a day, does that mean he's chronically absent for the whole day? Or how is it measured officially by the school district? And then the other question is going to be very similar, I guess. breakdown. A breakdown, because when I see here the chronic absenteeism, I don't see a chronic absenteeism between elementary, middle, and senior high, and secondary, and there's a big difference. I think we could all agree that when you have children, elementary children, when they're chronically absent, we're talking that's a different type of absenteeism. That's like a family absenteeism compared to, hey, a kid who's 15, 16 years old, he's got a scooter, if he's 16, he may or may not be driving. I guess less kids drive nowadays, but we're talking about two different types of chronic absenteeism, but I don't see the data. So could you address the first question and then, of course, the second, or more like a statement, I suppose? Thank you.
Madam Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Trustee Barone, if it's okay, I'm going to actually do the second one first, and then I'll turn over the first one. So again, I think we've seen through our presentations that there's different data points we'd like to present in a different manner, that you'd like to receive in a different manner. So I think thank you for that suggestion as we look forward to creating the new template moving forward. For the second part, Madam Vice President, if I will turn it over to Ms. Jones over chronic absenteeism.
Madam Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Danielle Jones for the record. As far as chronic absenteeism, it's based on 10% of absences of their enrolled days in school. So if a student is enrolled, as many days they've been enrolled in the school, if they're absent more than 10%, they're considered chronically absent. So depending on if they miss one or more classes, it's still included in that percentage.
Again, if you have a junior or a senior who has like a load of 6 to 8 classes, he doesn't show up to the first period psychology class because, quite frankly, he doesn't need that class. He's already on track to graduate, so he decides to go ahead and sleep in because he really doesn't want to have to put up with this guy Barone, who's going to be yelling at him for being late anyhow, and is going to ask him for his work. So if he misses that class, and of course he does it more than 10%, he's going to be considered chronically absent, right?
Madam Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Trustee Barone, that's correct. And that's the difference where we really, as we communicate with you and with our schools, there's a difference between truancy and chronic absenteeism. And with the truancy, that's when we get into the denial of credit, when students have more than 10 absences in a single class. But chronic absenteeism really it captures a different type of data point. So what you're saying is correct, and why it's a difficult measure to create huge gains in, which is why we're very proud of the 10% we received in 2 years. But that student who, for maybe a reason that maybe as educators we don't agree, but for that student makes sense, misses that class, that becomes a chronically absent student, correct?
This is good information. Thank you.
And our interim superintendent?
Vice President, members of the board, for the record, Brenda Larson Mitchell, and it's absent if they are absent 50% or more of the school day, just for clarification.
Thank you. With that, we're going to go to Trustee Zamora.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, Vice President. I do have a question this time. So I actually have heard through, the social media of parents just kind of having discussions, and a big thing that I had heard are that students are still getting locked out of their classroom when they're showing up late, which ends up making them miss their class, which at that point ends up being an absent, like them being marked absent. Is that something that we're seeing across like the middle high school levels?
Madam Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Trustee Zamora. So that is not something that is a policy we have as a district. Certainly, schools through, they have their site-based autonomy. I'm not aware of any schools that do that as a school-wide policy. But again, as we're getting into certain data points and really working with school supervisors to find out what the exact processes are, that would be uncovered. But that is not a system-wide policy.
Okay, and I hope that we're able, I know you said you're combing through some stuff, right, through everything, and I hope we're able to kind of see, as of now, if the schools who have majority of number of absentees, probably what their in-house policies are about it, because that was really interesting to me, because that it's like it's not good, right? It's not good practice at all. Like you're missing education time and everything. The second thing that I have is, do you have a breakdown of schools, elementary, middle, and high school compared to magnet schools who have strict rules about if you're absent a certain amount of times, you actually end up getting, it's not expelled, that's not the word, like removed from this, yeah, you get kicked out of the program, out of magnet program, just to kind of be able to visually compare and contrast like the difference, right? When there is stricter policy and when there's not that much.
Madam Vice President, members of the board, trustees, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell. Thank you for the question. So looking at the data, yes, we looked at magnet schools and they're substantially lower than our regular, their comprehensive schools, and that might play a factor into it because of the policies they have in place.
Okay, I'm curious to explore maybe just how we do like a policy for the schools that's not so strict, but just seeing how we can get there, right? Using those policies the magnets have and implement them district-wide to just, maybe numbers can go down. That was it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Trustee Guzman?
Thank you, Vice President Bustamante Adams. Actually, that policy that she was talking about, some of the high schools do it, they call a sweep. So 5 minutes after the bell rings, if you're in the hallway, they sweep and they put you in a room. That's what they're, yeah, my son had that happen once before his mother took care of it. Anyway, so I wanted to ask a couple of questions. The last time we discussed this, I talked about transportation and how important transportation is. And I know you did a study, and the like at Foothill, they like to have the bus pass because if they miss the bus, they're able to catch the next bus. I get that part, but there are some schools that have bus passes, and the students don't feel safe waiting at the bus stop. They don't feel safe on the bus. And so I was just curious if we did a deeper dive to find out if that was the reason why we had chronic absenteeism in some schools.
Madam Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Trustee Guzman. So again, the data we pulled was across the board, and by level, we did not see that transportation with students that have busing or not was a major factor in chronic absenteeism. The safety issue that you mentioned was. So whether that was having a safe path to school, a safe walking path, or at the bus stop, that certainly was, and is something that again, because we don't do this in a vacuum, it is with our community partners, it is with school police, and then who works with Metro and the county. So it is something, but it's a safety piece, not necessarily the access to the school buses versus the city buses versus walking. That wasn't a factor.
Okay, and then I also asked if you had talked to registrars about what they were seeing and when they were talking to the students and why the students were absent. Were we able to talk to the staff and see?
Madam Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, we really focused on those 5 root causes, and it's pretty much across the board when we talk to our schools, when we talk to the community and the families themselves. Basic needs, a big one is the child care, for the little siblings. The older kids have to stay home and watch them. They worry about the walking to school, like Mr. McPartland had mentioned. So it's a wide range of things, and my office has been really working hard to connect with the resources in the community, and our officers are connecting those to the family, to trying to bridge those gaps of those resources. So it's hard to pinpoint one thing because it really isn't, and every community has a different need. And so that's why we're really, really working hard, working with the municipalities to try to see how they can help us out too.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. So then, Trustee Cavazos?
Thank you, Madam Vice President. And I think that Ms. Jones just answered part of my question in answering Trustee Guzman. So thank you, Trustee Guzman. I was just going to ask that within this parameter of the home visits, which I'm very happy that those are still continuing, seems to be having great success with those. My question was going to be if there were any specific top 2 social emotional factors that you found to be prevalent. But I think you just pretty much kind of just covered that, so I'm going to go ahead and pass on a further question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Trustee. Next, Trustee Esparza-Estraffigan.
So I want to come back to my favorite topic, attendance officers. I want to talk about capacity. The last time we had the report, I did kind of dig into it and ask you guys, how many officers do we have? So that's the first part, just a basic, how many do we have? How many schools does each officer serve? Now, and I know that we had an opportunity to visit the school police facility as new trustees. And they talked to us about the program with combining social workers to go with officers. So I'm wondering, is there any level of collaboration with social workers that maybe schools have on site with your attendance officers? And then the third question, I'm sorry, I'm gonna just throw them all together, is are schools aware that they can have their own attendance officer that they could fund? And is that a trend that you're starting to see with schools? I'm curious on that piece of it. So there's 3 questions, and I can repeat any of them if you need me to. Sorry.
Madam Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Trustee Esparza-Estraffigan. So we have 30 attendance enforcement officers. We have, some of them are 12 months, some of them are 9 months because we do the summer work. They each service about, I'm going to say 10 to 15 schools in their area. Our schools know that they can hire attendance officers, and our office actually trains them to tell them like how to build those relationships, how to give them the resources. And as far as the social worker goes, we keep everything tracked at Infinite Campus. So when the officer goes to the home, they will write in there exactly what the family said, what they need, and if they need a social worker, and they'll even go back to the school and communicate that with the school because they have a really good relationship with every school that they service. And that's our goal right now, is they're going to every school at the beginning of the year, introducing themselves and giving them some information. So it's a really collaborative effort from the officers to the school. We're very transparent with the schools and what we find. And we added a tab in, or a section in that request, so schools can put their own notes in on what they need from us. So if there's something specific we need to relay to the families, or things that they've tried already, then we have that communication going too. So it's an update for this year, but we're excited that we've implemented it. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you for listening, because that was a request in the very beginning, is what is that collaboration and that communication that's happening? And I think that synergy is really starting to yield some results, and we're seeing it in the data. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Trustee Johnson?
Thank you. I really appreciate that we've done such good work to figure out root causes, because that's the way that we solve the problems. One of the things that I was thinking, and I was hopeful you might have some of this data, and I don't know if you do. So I was looking at the absentee rates as we broke it out by subgroups, and then, so that's slide 21 with the line, the bar graph. Yeah. And then, so at least 2 of these groups, so American Indian, Alaska Natives, and then Black students are below, or they are above district average, and as well as Hispanic students are above district averages. And then I know from memory that at least 2 of those groups have proficiency rates that are below district averages. And so to me, that seems like there's some correlation between the 2. And again, I know we've done a lot of efforts on finding those root causes and doing other outside things. And I know that our work as a district is around what we do best, teaching and learning. And so there just has to be some connection between the 2, why students are missing school and then also their proficiency, and how are we addressing those 2 things simultaneously to then drive the outcomes that we want. So I guess the question is, what are the ways that we are looking at inside of the classroom work to then ensure, so especially around teaching and learning practices, which may not be specifically the things that you are doing, so this might be for you. Like, how are we aligning those strands to ensure that we have really strong, engaging lessons every day, and like kids want to be at school, because the external factors we can't necessarily control. We can definitely control inside of our classrooms.
Madam Vice President, members of the board, for the record, Brenda Larson Mitchell, Trustee Johnson, thank you for the question. So what I hear you saying is high quality tier 1 instruction, making sure that our instruction is aligned to the intent of the standards, that it is rigorous, making sure that we have formative and summative assessments to inform and guide instruction, to provide differentiated instruction for students, and then of course our tier 1 instructional materials. The board has passed policy that requires our instructional materials to be culturally relevant to our students, that our students see themselves in our curriculum. So the Tier 1 instructional materials that we have recently purchased in English language arts, mathematics, and science are aligned to the policies. And so we are seeing high engagement with our students with our Tier 1 monitoring tool when we do classroom walkthroughs. So it is imperative that our Tier 1 instruction is engaging. We know that 80% of our students should be proficient with high-quality Tier 1 instruction. So you're spot on. It's critical.
Got it. And then the other part of that is, and this is, I guess, for you, Dr. Larson Mitchell, and also the team, part of the work that you are doing around chronic absenteeism is working with our administrators and making sure that you're doing training. What's the follow-up that you all get to do to ensure that what you're training in the beginning of the year, middle of the year, is being implemented so that we can track those results? And then similarly with our Tier 1 instruction, how are we supporting teachers along the way to give strong coaching and support to ensure that they're growing inside of their classrooms?
Madam Vice President, sorry, I got to remember that every time. For the record, Brenda Larson Mitchell, Trustee Johnson. So professional learning is provided to our principals, focusing on high-quality Tier 1 instruction. We just finished professional learning on our PLCs, on Analyze, finishing our teaching and learning cycle this summer, and then principals provide that professional learning to their staff. I would also say that we're implementing multi-tiered system of supports, that framework, which includes the academics, it includes the behavior, the social emotional well-being, and then we also have MTSS for attendance. So when we have all those pieces coming together, we're focusing on the whole child, what they need to be successful in the classroom. And we also now have a district-wide coaching framework. We've never had that before. It is consistent. Principals will finish professional learning this winter on the coaching framework. So we know that when we have expectations, we have to provide support. We have to provide the professional learning, and we have to provide the job-embedded coaching. So we now have a district-wide consistent coaching framework.
I love that. Thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
If there are no other questions, I guess I'll take the time to make a motion that we accept the.
I actually have one other trustee, so I'm going to.
Jump the gun.
He can still make the motion.
Everybody, we don't get the motion often, so that's right. It's a big deal for us to motion.
You don't, so go ahead.
Like to now I'm lost my train of thought.
Sorry, do you want to make a motion?
No, I make a motion to adopt the report by Mr. McPartland and team. We really appreciate the information. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Johnson. I will entertain a second, but we still have discussion, so. Okay, then I'm going to go to Trustee Brooks.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I'll second the motion, and then I just have a very short question. In the presentation, you mentioned that there was a change to the Nevada Department of Education business rules. What was that change?
Madam Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Trustee Brooks, thank you for the question. And again, I'm not, Mr. Manzi with his as amazing as he is with the data, but it was regarding the putting the students, the student count in this, the students were being duplicated in each student group and in the student count. So a student, and that's what they cleaned up. So again, it just changed the end count that was going into quantifying the chronic absenteeism.
Got it. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Did Ms. Gutierrez want to make a comment?
Madam Vice President, members of the board, Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell, Melissa Gutierrez for the record. I just wanted to clarify, 30.9 is where we are right now for chronic absenteeism. NDE has not completed their validation and given us permanent numbers yet, so we are still awaiting final numbers from NDE. We are at 30.9.
Thank you for that clarification. I also want to give our president, Garcia Morales, an opportunity to have any questions.
Simply kudos to the team. Thank you for the work that you're doing and look forward to continued progress in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. And I also echo that. You have entertained my questions, you have entertained my presence, and I can see from the feedback from the county and the local municipalities that we're headed in the right direction. So thank you. So with that, we do have a motion by Trustee Johnson and a second by Trustee Brooks. So we're going to go ahead and cast our votes. Trustee Garcia Morales?
Aye.
Bless you. With that, it passes from 7-0. Thank you very much to the team. Okay, next we have 4.01, Notice of Intent, Clark County School District Regulation 2130.
Let's do this. So excited.
Bless you.
Madam Vice President, members of the board, Dr. Larson Mitchell, for the record, Kelly Kowal-Paul, Chief Strategy Officer. The recommendation before you this evening is for the amendment of Regulation 2130, District Organization. The legislation that took effect July 1 impacts some of the specific requirements related to principals and school organizational teams that are outlined in this regulation. First up, the legislation makes the principal a voting member rather than a non-voting member of the school organizational team. This change is reflected on page 15 of 29, where the school organizational team membership is outlined. As pointed out by the member of public and included on another piece of reference material, the addition of the principal as a voting member requires that an additional parent member is added to the SOT to ensure that parents and guardians represent 50% of the voting members of the SOT from a different portion of NRS 3D8G. After we received that written comment yesterday, we made the update to this section, which is why you have revised reference material today, just to update that section that I missed. Second, the legislation significantly changed the role of the SOT as it relates to the school plan of operation. The SOT is no longer purely advisory. With this legislation, 75% of the voting SOT members who are present at the time of the vote must vote to approve the school plan of operation before it's submitted to the school associate superintendent. If they do not approve the school plan of operation, it escalates to the superintendent for development and approval. This change is reflected in several places. First is on page 11 of 29. In the school plan of operation section, you'll see a softening of the language around decision-making, removal of language that describes the advisory role of the SOT, and the requirement for approval spelled out plainly. It's also mentioned in page 19 of 29. There are some conforming changes within the list of activities that principals are required to undertake during the SOT meetings, and then conforming changes on page 20 of 29 in the list of actions that a school organizational team may undertake. For the sake of transparency, the legislation also includes a couple of changes that are not reflected in the recommended changes. First is that the legislation requires a principal to select staff in accordance with the applicable collective bargaining agreement. As this was already in Regulation 2130, it required no changes. The legislation also significantly changes the role of the SOT in a selection of a principal in the case of a vacancy. The most significant change within that section is that 75% of the voting members of the SOT present at the time of the vote may vote to reject the superintendent's first selection of a candidate to fill a principal vacancy. Because the regulation already requires that the superintendent develop and implement a selection process for principals that is in accordance with the law, an update to the regulation itself is not necessary. However, the principal selection process has already been updated to conform with these changes and is already in practice. This is also the same legislation that requires unused carry-forward dollars to be reverted to the state education stabilization account. But because the regulation already requires that principals specifically plan for and use carry-forward dollars and that the superintendent monitor the use of those dollars, no change to the regulation is necessary for this change either. Finally, since the regulation was being revised to put in place the changes in the law, we took the opportunity to include a reference to the recently adopted Regulation 1140.1, Parent and Family Engagement in School Culture Investigations, and that's on page 21 of 29. In the list of actions that an SOT may take, the reference to Regulation 1140.1 was added to the item that states that the SOT may initiate such an investigation. In addition to those changes, there are a few minor typographical and outline corrections called out with no other impact to the content of the regulation. With that, I'm happy, of course, to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. Since this is an action item, if you haven't completed a public comment card for this section, please do so now. I don't see anybody. Do you? We don't see any public comment for this action item, so I'll ask trustees if they have any questions. Trustee Zamora.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. I don't know if you all will be able to answer this, but I'm just curious because I know that because we're adding the school principal, that means we have to add a parent to the team. I'm worried because we see that parents are not fully involved, right? They can sign up, sometimes they don't show up. Is there a limit of how many meetings a voting parent can miss before they get removed from the SOT?
Madam Vice President, members of the board, Dr. Larson Mitchell, I can't answer the question. There's not a limit. There's no guidance in the law whatsoever as to the removal of a member of an SOT once they've been elected. So when principals are asking for guidance in this area, we usually tell them just try to encourage your parents to participate. In fact, the law allows for fewer members, parent members, if you can't get any. So they recognize that some parents may not want to be a part of the SOT and that sometimes that's a challenge, in which case my guidance to the principals is to try and make sure that they seek parental input in other ways.
Because this is something that I'm concerned about, right? Because the point of the SOT was to get more involvement of the community and parents. But I've also seen that sometimes it's just the school principal and admin running the meetings. They're the only ones at the meetings and making these voting decisions. So I think that's something for, the district to explore more, how we can support the schools to get the SOT involvement, get parents involved in the SOT, because we're giving them the voice at this point, and how can we support them so they can participate? That was it. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Cavazos.
Thank you, Madam President. At this time, I'd like to make a motion to accept Agenda Item 4.01, Notice of Intent, Clark County School District Regulation 2130, with special thanks to Ms. Kelly KP, as I call her, and she doesn't mind, for making that change having to do with the additional parent position. Thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Oh. Trustee Zamora.
I should have made the motion. I will second the motion.
Okay, I want to be able to ask our President Garcia Morales if she has any questions.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. I do not have any questions at this time.
Okay, so we have a first by trustee Cavazos, a second by trustee Zamora. Please cast your votes. Trustee Garcia Morales.
Aye.
All right, that motion passes 7-0. We are going to go on to public comment on items not listed as action items on the agenda. This is 5:01. We do have some people that called in, so I would like to ask Nicole Beer to come up. I don't know if we have James Bayless in the audience. And then we do have Beatrice Rubio. You're in the, what is it called when you're in the batter, when you're next up to bat? On deck. Thank you.
Ready? Yep. Good evening, Nicole Beer for the record. I come before you today with a variety of concerns regarding CCSD library programs. Since 2019, Robin Carpenter and I have worked with leadership in this board to improve policies, ensure they were followed after the board has unanimously approved such said policies in 4 different votes. In spite of all the efforts by Brenda Larson Mitchell, this board, and Dr. Mansell, we have another start to a year with site-based principals who think they don't have to follow policies and regulations in this district, and area superintendents who don't hold them accountable. There are numerous library problems, but there were 3 truly the worst of the worst. I'll start with Hancock Elementary. The principal's Frances Lucero. Ms. Lucero was my AP for 4 years at Martinez. I found her to be fair and kind. However, in 4 months at Hancock, she has tried to circumvent policies by gifting positions to uncertified library teachers, saving positions, all the while reflying those library positions each time she was caught trying to place yet another non-certified person into that teacher library position. In addition, she has been dishonest with the librarian candidate by telling her on arrival to the interview for the library position at Hancock, she was told they had already hired a librarian, but she could either have a first-grade job or autism. She lied to district leadership and said that the candidate was not interested in the library position. Keep in mind this teacher has a library endorsement and years of experience, however, does not hold an autism endorsement. Leadership in CPD, not Dr. Mansell, said, quote, "We can't make a principal hire someone." No, you can't, but you can hold them accountable for dishonesty, numerous attacks to hire unqualified people, lying to potential staff members to trick them into taking hard-to-fill positions. The answer was the region is working with them. At Hancock, you have a probationary administrator, and the region already can't control her. Daniel, hasn't had a library program or a certified teacher librarian for years. They have a licensed licensed teacher who checks out books. Sometimes, most of the time, is simply used to sub. When asked by leadership why she didn't follow policy 6161, she cited NRS 469. She will find no relief there. If you think that Dr. Jarrah, myself, and Trustee Garvey were not strategic when we initially had this, look under the part of section, it's now NRS 385, that talks about board programs created. That's a library program. We're not as dumb as we look. On the McDaniel website, Ms. Darla Richards states, "As principal, my door is always open and welcome your input." I don't care, Ms. Richards, if your door is open, the door to your library is closed. You don't get to decide that the students of McDaniel are not worthy of all the benefits that go with the library program. But rest assured, superintendent and trustees, the region's working with her. Shouldn't the line be, we're going to do the best for students and their outcomes, the community, and staff? And finally, I would say that we have another problem, which will get its whole entire public comment, Johnston Middle School, where we are committing geographic institutional racism.
Thank you, Ms. Beer. The next person, Ms. Rubio. And then in the batter, Lorena.
Good evening, Board of Trustees and Interim Superintendent Larson Mitchell. For the record, my name is Beatrice Rubio. I am here to express serious concerns regarding the treatment of employees within CCSD and the handling of complaints and misconduct. Over the years, I have observed a troubling pattern that suggests a lack of respect for dedicated employees and a failure to address legitimate concerns. Specifically, it seems that employees who demonstrate a strong commitment to their work need to be adequately recognized, while those engaging in unethical behavior are rewarded. One particular issue that underscores these problems involves the forgery of my signature by an employee in the TIS division, Elba Espinosa. Despite following the chain of command from my supervisor, Jessica Fry, to the chief of the TIS division, Marilyn Delmont, and the chief of operations, Mike Casey, and interim superintendent, Brenda Larson Mitchell, my concerns have not been adequately addressed. I was dismayed to receive an email from Dr. Delmont excusing this behavior. It is concerning that Elba Espinosa has since been promoted, and it appears that Jessica might be next in line for promotion. This pattern raises questions about the criteria used for promotions and the overall integrity of the evaluation process. I urge the board to take these matters seriously and consider the following actions: external investigation, review of promotion criteria, transparent communication. Respect and fairness in the workplace are essential for maintaining morale and ensuring that employees feel valued for their hard work and commitment. I believe that by taking these steps, CCSD can rebuild trust and demonstrate its commitment to treatment all employees with the respect they deserve. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Rubio. Lorena?
Hi, good evening, Lorena Biasotti. I strongly believe we should lock up all libraries until porn books are removed, period. Since we insist on making a science out of misbehavior, I thought I'd read from a source you'd all agree with, The Hill. And it states, as American students enter the 2023-2024 school year, our educational system faces three interlocking crises: severe academic underperformance, rampant student misbehavior, and an unprecedented teacher shortage. While there are many components to each of these issues, one common thread linking and exacerbating them all is the turn towards so-called restorative justice in schools. In contrast to traditional approaches to discipline, which rely on punishment to deter future misbehavior, restorative justice encourages students to reflect on their transgressions and their root causes, talk about them, usually with the victims of the misbehavior, and try to make amends. This approach began to gain adherence in the mid-2010s and has gained popularity in the near decade since, despite the entirely predictable evidence against its efficacy. It should have been obvious that academic outcomes would get worse if students could misbehave with impunity. Anyone who has ever managed a classroom knows that when students who are attempting to stay on task are distracted by other students who are constantly disrupting, learning suffers. While suspensions and expulsions are extreme measures, the efficacy of which can be justified called into question with respect to misbehaving students themselves, they do provide well-behaved students relief from disruption and or victimization. They also act as deterrents to those who might be inclined to misbehave. It is no surprise that without these disciplinary measures, teachers' time is more consistently wasted on classroom management, students are more consistently disrupted, and chaos reigns. And chaotic environments are not ideal for academic learning. It should have been equally obvious that students would misbehave more if they face no punitive consequences for misbehavior. Some restorative justice programs go so far as to reward misbehavior with time in decompression rooms and the administration of snacks. Nearly all of them encourage students to blame factors outside of their own control for misbehavior. When students learn to say, "I pushed you because I was hungry," or the like, they are claiming external reasons for antisocial behavior. In this way, restorative justice fails to inculcate in students the self-control required to behave in pro-social ways. As in the case of many such short-sighted virtue signaling policies, it is socio-economically disadvantaged children of color, the vast majority of whom are victims, not perpetrators, of school-based violence and misbehavior.
Thank you, Ms. Lorena. Lawrence Weekly, and then Interim Superintendent Dr. Larson Mitchell. I'm going to prompt you to say a few words because the first day of school starts on Monday, and also our most seasoned trustee, Lola Brooks. Just some couple of words since school starts on Monday. Thank you, Mr. Weekly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you not start my clock until I set protocol, please? So I'm gonna follow with this gentleman here because I know he's saying it in his sleep at night. He said it so many times tonight. With Madam President on the phone, Madam Vice President here tonight, you've done a fantastic job in chairing this meeting. Of course, to all the trustees here assembled, and of course to our interim superintendent, Larson Mitchell. And I don't know why they're leaving you out, Deputy Superintendent Melissa Gutierrez, but thank you so very much also to this evening. I stood tonight, and let me just say this, I'm not running for anything else. I've done my time in public service, but as a community member and as a taxpayer, we just have a lot of concerns that we've spoken with, and thank you to our interim superintendent for allowing us to be able to meet with her again to talk about some of the concerns we've had. Now, some of the things that we wanted to talk about, and when I say we, a group of African-American men, it's weird. We came together organically. I was at a men's health fair, and one of the dads started talking about a situation in his school with his kid. And we all just started gathering, and lo and behold, after that, it's weird. We all met up again at a men's restorative circle event, where there were about 60 men assembled there, all black men, just talking about how to be better fathers, how to be better husbands, how to be more responsive in our community. And so we all talked about, and we mentioned, remember the days of Wake Up, led by Marzette Lewis that used to come here? You all ought to praise God you don't have that today, because your meetings wouldn't be this calm. But this group of men, it's about 35 of us. And Superintendent Larson Mitchell came out and met with several of us. She came on the radio with us, and we appreciate that. Afterwards, she went over and spoke to a group of African-American fathers who were spending time with their children at a computer lab studying STEM and STEAM. So contrary to what people believe, black men do care about our children. We're here because we're saying no more silos. We want to be inclusive. We want to have a seat at the table to talk about our kids. Expulsion and absenteeism is very important in our community. And so we know that you all are dealing with some big issues, cell phone issues, Lundy Elementary School, teacher shortages, teacher pay. We understand all of that. But we also understand that as we look at relationship building, and Interim Superintendent, I want to thank you because you made some great steps in helping that to make us believers. And we just like to see it follow through. I'm going to quote you. You said, "My priorities are improving outcomes, building relationships, championing our educators, and fostering trust across all facets of our community." That does not mean some communities, that means everyone. And so, trustees, I want to just ask you all again today to be open, be inclusive. I know they're dismantling DEI all across the country, where they're trying to. But what makes Nevada unique is we meet each other, we talk to each other, we help each other, we build together. And that's what we want to see happen. Trustee Barone, welcome aboard. I know that you're going to do a fantastic job. I want to thank you and Trustee Zamora for asking for that disaggregated information.
Thank you, Mr. Weekly. Interim Superintendent, and then Trustee Lola Brooks.
Thank you. So Monday, we kick off the 24-25 school year. We're extremely excited. To all of our educators, our support professionals, licensed professionals, and administrators, very grateful for the work that we are doing, the hard work to prepare for our students returning on Monday. So very appreciative for all the hard work that is happening out there. To our parents, I'm very excited and proud to welcome our students back to the school year. I'm confident that if we all work together, we will demonstrate amazing results for our students. And to the community, very grateful for all of the support. We need to work together as one community for all of our children. So very excited to kick off the 24-25 school year. I'll be at the bus yard, I think, at 5 a.m. on Monday. So looking forward to it.
Awesome, thank you. And our most seasoned trustee, Trustee Brooks.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Shout out to the parents and all the staff that are going to be opening schools. It's going to be a great year. You've got this. I know that you're here for the right reasons, and I'm ready to get started.
Thank you so much. With that, I'm going to entertain a motion for adjournment. Trustee Williams?
Thank you, Madam Vice President. At this time, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn this meeting.
Okay, I have a first by Trustee Williams. Do I have a second?
I second.
Okay, I have a first from Trustee Williams, a second by Trustee Guzman. Please cast your votes. And President Garcia Morales?
Aye.
With that, the adjournment passes 7-0. Thank you. Have a good evening.